I call the special meeting of March 14th, 2023 to order. Roll call, Mr. Steele.
Thank you, President Bogus. Commissioner Alexander.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher. Commissioner Lamb.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Matomedy.
Here.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Here.
Vice President Wiseman Ward.
Here.
President Bogus.
Here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, at this time, before the board goes into closed session, I call for any speakers to the closed session items listed in the agenda. There will be a total of 5 minutes for speakers.
Seeing none in person.
Please raise your hand if you're a virtual participant and care to give public comment on this item. Seeing no hands raised.
Okay. Please know that the board will take a roll call vote on the recommended student expulsions when we reconvene to open sessions. Now I recess this meeting at 5:01.
SFUSD will provide closed captioning and American Sign Language ASL interpreter services throughout today's board meeting. Live transcription can be found here, https://www.streamtext.net/player?event=SFUSD-board. Attendees who wish to provide public comment to the board and would like an ASL interpreter can use the Q&A box in the Zoom app to type their name or handle and list the item or items on the agenda they would like to comment on. The attendee will need to have a functioning camera in order to communicate with the interpreter and the board. When it is the attendee's opportunity to provide comment, the Zoom host will promote the attendee to panelist and enable the attendee's video. Translation, go ahead, please.
Thank you. SFUSD is offering interpretation services in Spanish and Cantonese. If you need interpretation, please dial the following phone number. After dialing, please introduce a PIN number. This message will be repeated in Spanish and Cantonese. Buenas tardes. El Distrito Escolar Unificado de San Francisco ofrece servicios de interpretación en el idioma español. Si necesita interpretación por medio de Google Meet, por favor marque el siguiente número telefónico seguido de la clave de acceso. 1-319-382-9676. Por favor, introduzca la clave 665-996-976, seguido de la tecla numeral. Gracias. Cantonese interpreter, please. Thank you.
各位家長晚上好，我哋將會為今晚嘅會議提供免費嘅中文傳譯服務。若果你有需要的話咧，可以打熒光幕上面嘅電話號碼係1484-854-3328，密碼係721-609-895，井字。唔該 ，Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our translation services.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will reconvene to open session. And we will vote on a matter of student expulsion. I move approval of I move approval of the expulsion agreement of one middle school student, matter number 2022-2023, number 19, from the district for the remainder of the current spring 2023 semester and the following fall 2023 semester. The board votes to expel. Can I have a second? Second. Roll call, Mr. Steele.
Thank you, President Bogus. Commissioner Alexander.
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb.
Yes.
Commissioner Matomedy.
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Yes.
Vice President Wiseman Ward.
Yes.
President Bogus,
Yes.
7 ayes.
There are no actions to read out from closed session. And we will go to item D1, Superintendent's Report.
Thank you, President Bogus. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to provide an update on a few issues. Just a week ago, I had to announce an error that the district made in terms of not filing required information with the state to regarding the state withholding of taxes for the 2022 school year. And, you know, since I started as superintendent, I've had to, share challenging issues related to our payroll system and how we're managing it. But that was just incredibly difficult to share because I know how impactful it has been on employees. I have been receiving emails just how they're counting on the district to deliver accurate information so that they can move forward with their taxes and in some ways move forward with their lives. And I know even if I don't get back to everyone, I read those and understand, just how terrible situation this is. And so we did move as quickly as we could to address it. We are on track to resolve the issue. The quarterly reports were submitted to EDD on Friday. And we expect issue resolution completion because they need to process them by the 17th. We sent out an email update yesterday. We've set up a website as well that has an FAQs. It's the www.sfusd.edu/2022 payroll tax. And we'll keep sharing information as we get more of it. And know we're working to provide support through this tax season and beyond around this issue and the other issues our employees have been facing. If you go to the next slide. Do want to appreciate the board approved a calendar at the last board meeting and also authorized us to look at spring break. And so we have our academic calendar for the 23-24 school year. The first day of school will be August 16th, and then spring break will be the week of April 8th to 12th, which works out well for our employees and also works out well for our students, in particular our students who are celebrating the Eid holiday. They won't be missing school at this time. For the 24-25 calendar and beyond, we shared the process we'll be going through, and that actually will start next month. And so you should start looking for communication around that. And we plan to have a 2-year calendar that we can identify, a 2-year calendar where we can start earlier. Then we can have the community discussion around the holidays we might want to observe. Also got feedback on this calendar about whether we want to start in the middle of the week or on a Monday and end on a Friday. So this will be, we'll have a process where we can hear from our community to know what's going to work best. And then lastly, just want to share that along with while we're going to go through that process, we know there will be students who celebrate Eid this year, who celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur next year. And we have now updated our board policy and actually have a new administrative regulation on the recognition of religious beliefs and customs. So per the board's direction, we had looked at other best practices from other districts and to update our policies and regulations. And so our new regulation now is that students and families are not really trying not to make a requirement to choose between celebrating their holiday and participating in school. So we are issuing an annual major holiday calendar with observances that may impact attendance. You may have seen that at the last board meeting. We're asking our staff to make every reasonable effort to avoid scheduling exams, athletic events, contests, and other special events. Students will be excused from school for observing those holidays. And we'll have that in the system. And then we're publishing the calendar and communicating expectations to school staff. So I'm looking at our head of communications. We have Eid coming up next month. So we'll make sure to share this now that we have these updated regulations. So that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. And with that, we will go to item E1. And I will ask for a motion and a second on that item.
So moved. Second.
And I will pass it to the superintendent to delegate to staff to present.
Sure, I'd like to bring up Anne Marie Gordon, our interim head financial officer. And we have here our CDE fiscal expert in the audience, Elliot Duchan. So we're passing around our presentation related to the second interim. So this is the second of two interim reports that we provide to the state on this year's budget and expenditures. And so I'll turn it back over to Ms. Gordon. And we do have here our interim associate superintendent of business services, Dr. Clark, as well.
Good evening, everyone. I also have one printed copy. I will, once we get the full book printed, I'll distribute those to all of you, but they are large, so I recommend using the version that is on board docs. That's what this is, but if anyone wants to flip through it, we can hand that out.
So Anne Marie, I can put that in the office for commissioners to review on the desk if that's okay. Does
Great.
that work?
Okay, well then, I'm excited to be here again to share our second interim report of this school year. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. So as a reminder, we do, as Dr. Wayne shared, we do 2 interim reports each school year, and this is number 2. Interim reports identify changes to revenues, expenditures, and fund balance, and provide multi-year projections for this and the next 2 fiscal years. And based on these factors and how our forecast looks, 1 of 3 certifications is made to the California Department of Education. Positive, if right, and we are bringing forward both for the county and the district a positive certification. That is our recommendation this evening, which would certify that the district and county office are able to meet our financial obligations. Qualified means we may, and negative means we won't. But for this evening, we will bring forward a positive certification recommendation for both. We'll start with the County Office of Education. The county office budget is a bit simpler and more straightforward. And so we'll go ahead and go through those. And then the district has a little bit more meat to the content, but then for the discussion, obviously we'll go through any of it that you have questions about. So starting with the county, recommended certification positive. And looking at the county's unrestricted general funds, you can see the slide deck is a number of charts that look just like this, but want to maintain consistent structure. And as I shared at first interim, we'll always refer back to whatever the previous presentation was for reference. And so here for all of these, we have the first interim budget and then the second interim budget, which is highlighted. Going through the revenues, expenditures, and ending fund balance here, you can see there are very minor updates overall compared to first interim. And there were also very few updates from the adopted budget. So within the county, we have a lot of consistency in what we see and in terms of the plans that are made or change year over year. For this year, we moved payroll and the legal departments into the county budget in an attempt to better reflect some of the functions that we hold as a single district county. And so we do have overall higher expenditures compared to last year. But what you can see is that that has resulted inadvertently in deficit spending within the county budget this school year. That is the negative, the red numbers for the net shortfall. And so we did not intend to create this pattern within the county budget. And so when we go, when we move to the next slide, I'll speak a little bit to how we're going to correct that so that we have stability, consistency, and alignment between our ongoing revenue and ongoing expenditures in the county budget. So the overall picture for this year and through 24-25 is that the county is projected to remain balanced. To reduce that deficit spending, what we will plan to move the payroll department back into the district's general fund. Legal for the time being will stay in the county. And we've had some discussion about how best to reflect, right? This is after a lot of discussion all through the year last year, recognizing that we do have uniqueness as a single district county, being a large single district county, that we want to make sure that we are in a thoughtful way reflecting those responsibilities in our budget, rather than having it all in one where it's hard to disentangle or really see those duties. And so I think there will be more to come on that and how to do it in a way that really makes sense in terms of the big picture and the mechanics. But I think at the end of the day, where we are for right now is we're in a good position for this year. We're going to make some adjustments to make sure that in an ongoing way, our county office budget is aligned. There.
The only other thing that I would add is that a part of that transition, looking at the 23-24 budget, is to look at a pro rata share of those costs associated with county office functions and school district functions. And so we'll be working through that process as we finalize development of next year's budget.
So on to the district, for which we also recommend a positive certification. And let's see. So we have a number of different snapshots of the general fund overall. Starting here with the unrestricted general funds. One important note is that our year-to-date expenditures in the second interim report are fully incorporated in a way that we were not able to report at first interim. So during our first interim report, we had not successfully posted all of our payroll expenditures to our general ledger. And so looking at those reports of our year-to-date spending, it was very low. We have caught up so far this year. So that means that when it comes to our year-to-date spending, it does reflect the full second interim period, which is through January. So that is exciting news. We're still working on how to make that process as smooth and frequent as it's supposed to be. But for the purposes of the second interim report, it means that we're in really good shape in terms of reporting accurately what our expenditures are so far this year. The major update on this table, even though it actually looks, oh, sorry, back one. The change looks relatively minor, but I think the update that is the most significant is that we have updated our local control funding formula revenues using the most recent LCFF calculator from FCMAT that incorporates the information that was shared in the governor's January budget proposal and our updated ADA and enrollment forecast. So that's right. Even though the overall change from one reporting period to the next is minor, that is one area that it's very critical for us to keep up to date estimates, as it's such a significant source of funding for us. The other piece here, the third bullet, is that there is a $20 million audit adjustment that is has been implemented since first interim to establish a systems reserve. So on the chart, you can see that in the total ending fund balance section E, the second row has a rainy day reserve and a systems reserve. So if you look at the report itself, those two are combined. So that's what that 60 million is, the 40 million commitment to hold our rainy day reserve. And then this audit adjustment is rather than increasing our investment in OPEB liability, we maintained the commitment of a $50 million contribution that had been determined last year and brought down what had been an increase to a creation of this systems reserve. This is, in the future, can be something that we consider as an, a reserve if needed for ongoing upgrades or things related to Empower SF. And also at some point in the future, we will also need to upgrade our financial system. Empower is only our employee information and payroll. And so we continue to operate with a financial system that in the short to midterm future may need to be looked at more closely. Next slide. So this, the restricted general fund, this slide was not a part of first interim, but we went, our CDE fiscal expert Pamela Zahn shared this slide at the board workshop in February. So we're incorporating it into this presentation, and we will for presentations of the budget moving forward, where we can kind of see, right, the different snapshots, the unrestricted and then the restricted, where we, right here, you can see we don't have the same pattern of deficit spending. There can be more variability depending on what funding sources are available to us based on decisions made by the state or federal government about categorical allocations, right? Stimulus funds, things like that. But these funds are not as impacted typically by declining enrollment in the way that our unrestricted general fund is. And you can see here, and we're actually going to have a little bit more detail to double click into this, but that state block grants, local measures, right, short-term funding present a new opportunity for us, an ongoing opportunity for planning and prioritization. And as an example, on the next slide, this is something we discussed a little bit at first interim, was getting a little bit more insight into what is our restricted general fund, what are the details. And so this is not comprehensive. This is not, we can provide more of that detail, and we each year when we recommend the budget, we include a longer list, a multi-page exhibit around our restricted resources. But this is a good example of, up at the top, some of our largest sources of ongoing funds that fall into the restricted general fund. And then the bottom is some of our one-time funds that are eligible to be used over multiple years. And so what that means is that some of these are documented as new revenue each year. For example, the Public Education Enrichment Fund annual allocation, or PEEF. And then some of this is reflected in the beginning fund balance. For example, I believe our ESSER 3 learning recovery, the third line, we've already received that allocation, and so it sits in our fund balance as we spend it out over multiple years. I think one note that I will make is that the special education number is right now reflective of both the money we get from the state and our district contribution from the unrestricted general fund. So we don't get $180 million from the state. We get much less than that, and then we contribute from our unrestricted. But to get a little bit more into the weeds, again, happy to answer questions, but wanted to provide a little bit more detail since that has been an area that we've really been talking about more over the past year. So I don't have additional talking points here, but wanted to then bring the unrestricted and restricted general funds together. So you can see all of it in one place. So that is just, again, to have the consistency of these different representations of how our budget breaks down and then comes back together. Our multi-year projections focus on the unrestricted general funds. And overall, the highlights here are very similar to what we saw at first interim. With the establishment of a budget stabilization reserve last year of $65 million, we have created a buffer for ourselves over the next few years, where as we develop a strategy for how to address ongoing deficit spending. We've made updates to some of our revenues, but there aren't significant changes or at this point in time that we have, really substantive updates to share. And on the expenditure side, most of it revolves around modest increases for step and column adjustments as staff, stay in the district, the cost of living adjustments that are that we get updates from the state, the governor's budget in January. So by the end of 24-25, we are in a slightly better position than what it looked like at first interim due to that updated LCFF revenue in particular. That the $11 million of the remaining reserve is not insignificant, but it is small in relation to our overall full budget.
When you look at the can you just go back to that slide for one moment? When you look at the multi-year projection, as Anne-Marie said, there are 3 years that show that the district is deficit spending. I do want to point that out because that is something that the board will need to pay attention to. And my recommendation would be to start in 2023, looking at budget balancing solutions. When you get to 24-25, that budget stabilization amount is down to 11 million. So we go from 65 million down to 11.3. And if that trajectory maintains, 25-26 is where there's going to be some serious issues with the district. So the whole purpose of a multi-year projection is to give you the roadmap so you can see what's happening, and then the district changes in assumptions and how the district will need to adjust and plan accordingly.
And that is a great segue into our last 2 slides. So the takeaways here: positive recommended certification. There aren't significant swings in our outlook. And so though we have retained that positive outlook, as Dr. Clark said, and as you can see, we continue to spend more than we generate on an annual basis through all of our various funding sources. So looking forward from here, we are in the midst of budget development for next year. We're prioritizing stability, transparency, and aligning to our budget to our vision, values, goals, and guardrails. Our next state budget update will come in May with the governor's May revise, and that will help inform our multi-year projections when we bring forward the recommended budget at the end of the school year. And also in alignment with what Dr. Clark just shared, to ensure long-term fiscal solvency, we intend to bring forward a resolution to commit to aligning our expenditures with our revenues as part of the 23-24 recommended budget.
Thank you, Anne-Marie Gordon and Dr. Clark. And I just want to end on that note as well. While in the short term, we're able to meet our obligations, I appreciate what Dr. Clark shared, but it's more than just we need to do this. We need to commit to going through this process. And we're also right now working with our labor partners. We want to make sure we're taking steps to to recruit and retain our valued staff through the negotiations process. And so we're going to have to really focus in on what our priorities are and how we're using our resources to support those priorities. So we should anticipate some real serious discussion about our long-term fiscal outlook throughout the 23-24 school year. And the first step will be laying the roadmap of what that looks like through a resolution.
Thank you so much, Superintendent and staff, for that. Much appreciation. If we could have anyone for public comment if there's cards.
Thank you. I don't have any speaker cards for in-person.
Please raise your hand
Did you-
if you care to speak.
President Bogus.
I'm sorry, we're going to have we have an in-person public comment, so
Did-
please hold.
Please turn on the mic.
My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with the United Front Committee for a Labor Party. And I think that it's very clear from this presentation here tonight that you continue to support privatization of the school district. There's been a whole struggle to get this private company Empower out of San Francisco. Many teachers have suffered and they continue to suffer because of the malfeasance and failure to properly pay the teachers or overpay them, causing massive problems. You're not addressing that. You're not addressing that. Teachers have not been paid properly and they have a problem with the IRS and the state franchise board. Nothing here to say about that. What are you going to do for the teachers who have to deal with their taxes? Not a word about that from the superintendent. I mean, it's complete negligence politically for the part of the school board. And obviously you don't have any concern about it. Not a word. So we say that there should be an end to privatization and also you have to have a proper treatment of the
Thank you.
workers and the teachers and the staff who are suffering
you.
as a result of privatization. Thank you.
That concludes in person.
For virtual participants, if you care to share a comment on the second interim report that was just shared, please raise your hand. Each speaker will have 1 minute to speak. Can we please have that repeated in Spanish and Chinese?
Buenas noches, por favor levante su mano. Si quiere añadir un comentario público de lo que se acaba de hablar en este momento, cada participante tiene 1 minuto solamente. Gracias.
如果大家想就住啱啱嗰個臨時報告咧，有啲乜嘢想表達的話咧，而家可以舉手做公眾發言啦。每人有1分鐘嘅時間嘅，唔該。
Thank you. Seeing one hand raised, Charles? Charles,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, thank you. At this point, I demand a state takeover. I used to be very afraid of losing local control, but the state should come down to 555 Franklin, put a chain and lock on the door and fire everyone in central office and replace them. You are proving yourselves incapable of handling any fiscal responsibility. If this had been a private sector business, it would have been shut down a year ago. You've had an extra year and still couldn't fix payroll. Check the W-2s. And there is plenty of money in our budget to have a reserve and pay labor partners 15 to 20% raise over the next few years. If you'd close the miserably under-enrolled elementary schools and cut from the ludicrous central office overhead, there would be money. But those will never happen because of graft, arrogance, incompetence, and taxpayer fraud, like spending money on lawsuits that was meant for bonds. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes virtual public comment for this item.
All right, are there comments from commissioners or questions? Commissioner Fisher?
Well, so Dr. Clark and Ms. Gordon, thank you very much for being here in front of us as always. Thank you, Mr. Deshawn, for being with us as well. I appreciate the breakdown of the ongoing versus one-time restricted funds. That's, I think, a really helpful explanation for me as a layperson. So thank you. And I also appreciate the intentional discussions that we have to have about what are our district responsibilities versus our county board of ed responsibilities. Could you help us understand a little bit more what that breakdown is going to look like? How are we getting to a stronger understanding of what lies in which responsibility? You know, I have questions about that, not just from a payroll standpoint, but also from a special education standpoint, right? You know, like we're a single district SELPA. So much of that overlaps. How do we tease that out? not just I guess mostly financially, but everywhere.
Thank you for the question. So yes, this is a single school district / county office of education, but as you can see from the two reports, they are separate and distinct entity. And so one of the things that Anne Marie and I are working on is to look at the two separate entities and make sure that there's clear delineation between functionality for what should be the county office of education versus what should actually be the school district. And so that's a part of the conversation that we're having now. And what I would anticipate is when we come back at minimum with, at least with budget development, we should be able to break out what the roles and functions are on the county office and their corresponding expenses in comparison to the school district side of the organization. And so if there are specific questions that you have, please send them so that we can make sure that we're including those in our presentation and be prepared to present.
Vice President Wiseman Ward.
Yes, echoing Commissioner Fisher's thanks to you all for being here and for sharing this information. And I know that I think it's since maybe since Dr. Wayne, you joined, that we've had this new sort of layout of the budget, and I really, really appreciate it. I think it's really helpful and allows me to understand it from a non-budget background and non-finance background. So thank you for that. I had one ask, and you could, maybe then it's through the superintendent. And then a question. One was, it's on page 9. Thank you, Ms. Gordon, for pointing out that the special education, that the 180 million wasn't state, it was state and district contributions. And I'm wondering, for purposes of this presentation or future presentations, whether that column might say state / local or state / district, because I do think that distinction is a really important one. Yeah, to the extent that that also includes federal money, I think that's just knowing that more precise would be useful. And then my question is on slide 7, you mentioned the 20 million audit adjustment that's been implemented. And I was just wondering if you could share a little bit of information about, I heard you say that we moved from OPEB liability to this new type of systems reserve, and was wondering if you could share the why. I'm guessing it's a good choice to make, and I was just wanting to understand what is the benefit to the district making that change.
Sure. And yes, we can make that update on for the special education in the future. So last spring, when we received the Proposition G funds after the legal challenge, there was discussion about how best to use, right? It's a large amount of one-time funding. And so one of the recommendations for how to partially use those funds was by paying into our OPEB liability to help, right, secure our kind of long-term financial position, having, right, that amount of one-time funding available for a one-time investment that really strengthens our reduces our liabilities in the future. The decision at that time had been to invest $50 million. As we went through the year-end closing process and were preparing our unaudited actuals at the beginning of the school year, our actual spending came in much lower than we had anticipated, to the degree that at the time, our former head financial officer recommended increasing that 50 million to 70 million. But I think over the course of the fall and the winter, and recognizing that, right, we have these other investments in systems that we anticipate needing to make in the future, conversation with our fiscal expert, Pamela Zahn in particular, was someone who suggested recognizing that there's a number of different areas where we need to have reserves available, and said, you know, that it would perhaps play in our favor to maintain the 50 million that we had originally said, and recognize that we can make that $20 million, establish the $20 million reserve for other needs that are becoming, right, that are ongoing priorities in areas where we know we're going to need to make investments in the next several years.
So, okay, so maybe I misunderstood. So then we still have so this systems reserve is in addition to, it's not, it's adding on and we're calling it something different, or it's the same pot of money?
Compared to what?
That I wrote down in my notes, the OPEB liability
So
funds.
the OPEB liability is not on this slide. That has already been set aside. And so that was at first interim, you didn't see that 20 because it had been set aside as well. So now because we've pulled it out of that liability and here, it shows back up.
Right, and Ms. Gordon said it well, because we're meeting our requirements around OPEB, and the bigger liability is what, how our financial system is working. So we wanted to, and appreciate the CD's guidance on this is where you need to invest those one-time funds.
Thank you.
Commissioner Matomedy?
So I am seeking, I guess I'm focused on what happens between now and June. Because we've had a couple communications from the CDE that have marked deadlines for action. And there was a reference earlier to a resolution that is to come before us, as well as a number of areas that have been highlighted around organizational changes, and I'm like addressing enrollment, accuracy of financial projections. And so I'm just trying to prepare as a board member for what to expect between now and what we see in June and how that will be communicated. So maybe this is whomever wants to answer.
So we recently had a meeting with CDE representatives, myself, Anne Marie, Mr. Deshawn, as well as Pam, and there were a couple of other district staffers involved, where we went through those specific items that that were given to the district and where there were responses requested. And I think it's, from my perspective, all of the different items that we discussed, the district did have responses and updates. And so at the end of that conversation, CDE was very happy to see that there had been movement in areas. They were aware of the challenges that we had in some other areas, but also understood that we had a game plan. And so as you can see with the discussion about the deficit spending, and being able to come back to the board and start to have deeper conversations and develop budget balancing solutions was a part of the plan, in addition to the conversations regarding the resolution in terms of the board's commitment to make sure we stay the course. And so from my perspective, I thought the conversation went well. They will expect to see between now and June that we stay the course. And if there are any anomalies, we would definitely need to have that conversation here and be able to share. Back to CDE.
And one thing I think that comes to mind that we discussed in that meeting, and I think, again, particularly with the restricted general fund, they really encouraged us to make as much progress as possible on having our multi-year plan or a multi-year kind of path mapped out for, in particular, those stimulus funds, the block grants that just came through, because that is an area where, as we have a more concrete plan, we can also reflect those more accurately in our budget each year. I think some of what I know can be sort of jarring looking at the unrestricted compared to the restricted is to see the significant fund balance. But we can actually, in our budget, establish, represent what we intend to do so that there's better alignment overall over multiple years to say, yes, that money is in our fund balance right now, but we do actually plan to budget for it next year. Let's build that into our projections so that as you look year over year, you don't see that same number that feels like something, that we have these funds available that we aren't using, or that we could really be thinking about how best, to serve our schools and students.
So I guess my question also has a timing element too, as far as what to expect from the board. What should the board be expecting between now and June, when we're expected to adopt, and when might we anticipate seeing a resolution or a draft resolution?
So
After the meeting with CDE, we've also worked to formalize written responses to the letter we received in October. So you'll get that at the end of the week. And then the resolution will come forward with the adoption of the budget. In between, we'll just continue with our progress, sharing our progress in developing the budget as well as our LCAP for the 23-24 school year. And then there is a public hearing on I think it's the beginning of June. And prior to that, I know when we had our budget workshop, we talked about you should see how the previous LCAP was aligned to our goals and guardrails as a baseline, and then how and still using that format to then say how for 23-24 our expenditures are more aligned, that's what we should see, to the goals and guardrails as identified through the LCAP expenditures.
Thank you. That's super helpful. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is shedding light and airing out our budget and LCAP process because and I see improvements being made and I really am, we have an LCAP director and so forth, but to the extent that we can provide transparency and both to the board as well as to the public is around the gaps that we need to close and also how we're engaging with the public prior to being asked to adopt a budget, because that is a cycle that I think this board has been really clear about wanting to get out from under. And then the other ask that I have, and then I'm done, is FCMAT's financial health risk assessment. Will we also be communicating on progress to close identified deficiencies in that report, since it's been a little over a year since we received it?
We can work on that.
I just, it's the anniversary.
Yeah.
So why not mark it by communicating progress and what we need to continue to work on? So I'd love to see that as part of the responses to the board as well.
Okay, we have Commissioner Lamb, Commissioner Alexander, and I also would make space if Elliot or Pam wanted to add anything to the conversation to make their way up. We can make space. And we also have Commissioner Sanchez.
Thank you for that tee up, President Bogus. Just a +1 on the FCMAT financial risk analysis and the reporting. I feel like we've raised it pretty consistently, and superintendent would like to understand, not today, but between now and before June, I would say, to have clarity on what that response and progress looks like. Mr. DeShawn, if I can ask you a couple of questions, and thank you first and foremost to Anne Marie and to Dr. Clark for all of this work as we head in the depths of the budget season. Mr. DeShawn, you've been with us for a little while.
This is my home again, away from home. Okay.
I wanted to follow up to the letter that was sent from Ms. Finley in March. That was also sent to all board members. I don't think that what was raised in that letter is anything new. Any new news that has been shared by you and our the CDE. Specifically, I wanted to ask about 2 outstanding issues, and I'm glad that you and the team had positive discussions and a commitment around progress from the district. Could you speak to kind of what you've seen from the past to where we're at now and where you like to see that momentum, specifically on the inadequate position control around systems control around identifying the budgeted, filled, and vacant positions, particularly for this current second interim, as well as looking forward, and then also around the accuracy of financial projections.
And we have how much time? So let me try to answer concisely. Position control in and of itself is a function of a number of factors, including your payroll and personnel system, which, as we all know, is still a work in progress. It is also a function of standard operating procedures, which I think need to be part of that work in process, and we've been working with staff on those issues. I think, as you're aware, there are a number of vacant open positions in the budget, and this kind of portends to what something you should probably deal with in that resolution, and that's looking at where those vacant positions are, how many will be filled. And that also is a basis, good tie-in to your position control of knowing where those budgets, where those positions are, the dollars they cost, and how many of those positions need to be filled and how many just can be deleted from the budget, what are necessary. All that comes with a little footnote that it has been very difficult to recruit and retain, mostly recruit, particularly your technical positions in the district. As big as this city is, it is somewhat insulated from other school districts. So it is great to have Dr. Clark on board. And one of the things which responds, I think, to what you're saying is a restructuring of the business division, which I think will help with those standard operating procedures, with your position control, and how you get to answering those questions about those big blocks in the budget. The other thing that I think, and this kind of comes between here and there, and that resolution is a commitment to look at, and I think this was also in the state letter, both you and Commissioner Matamati referring to, that your projections of the number of students need to be refined, and you've taken a major step with that. You've brought on a new demographer, flow analytics, or flow something or other. And I sat in on the interviews, and they're very well equipped to look at a more of a micro level of projections within the district and the school populations. So those three things need to come together in order to, and they will not be answered, by the way, by June. Your demographic information is probably a year long, at least till you get to that. Hopefully you'll have information to inform your 23-24 budget, because staffing needs to come way ahead of that. Trying to go back to your three questions, and I don't know if I answered all three of them. In regard to the fiscal health risk analysis, so there were a number of issues pointed out in there. I think that certainly your staff, as well as we can go back and look at what is not contained in the information that's been requested from CDE, because I think that covers a number of them. As you know, one of the major ones was, again, to bring on a CBO, which you have right now in the structuring of the business division. I think one of the things that, again, standard operating procedures come to the issue, and I don't remember all of them that are in the FHRA. I wish I could have committed them to memory, but our internal controls, and those are going to be dependent on really a restructuring of the business division and the interaction with human resources and who does what. So there's a kind of a control system in terms of both fiscal and data that come into the system. The obvious, it's not an elephant in the room, it's here. I think everybody knows what it is Empower, which I know you'll be dealing with in another agenda item. I don't think you have any choice but to continue with that and continue to look at other options in the long term, as Ms. Gordon pointed out. Did I get to all your questions? I might have talked myself out of remembering one of them.
Going into the second year now with us, with SF Unified, at the governance level, what is it that you would want to share with us for our looking ahead and ensuring that there is the stronger alignment and that this district has had structural deficit spending, and what does that path look like?
So you and we hopefully have helped to decrease that trajectory, but it's still there. As you know, year three, $36 million structural deficit. Structural deficit is that right? 36. That's still an issue, particularly with declining enrollment, and in years 24-25, which is not on the multi-year reports, projections, that is clearly a concern. So it's going to be key to fine tune those systems in the next year. And for the board, along with staff, to make a commitment, which is going to be difficult, to look at the way you spend money on staffing. And I pick the words "the way" because that doesn't necessarily mean anybody goes away or who comes or who goes, but how staff are aligned to your sites, to your programs, to some of your one-time funding and some of your restricted funding. Some of that one-time funding goes away at the end of 23, at the end of 24, and I think 28 even. So it's going to be very critical to prepare for those funding decreases. And again, I come back to, I think it was the first thing I heard Ms. Gordon say when I listened to the meeting before I actually came on board, was truing up your staffing to the needs of the schools. And when I say needs, I'm talking about bare bones needs. And it's at that point where you look at your unrestricted funds and your allocations to schools and make sure that you're matching staffing to the actual needs. And that's going to require some tough decisions. It may be attrition, hopefully takes care of some of those things, but equally realignment of staff, which I know can be a painful process, but you went through it this fall and you did survive. Open positions, again, I cannot underscore how important it will be for departments within the district to look at what their staffing needs are. And I think one of you mentioned vacancies. Your vacancies right now are near crippling, to be honest. I can't make it a stronger point that you have positions in your business division and human resources that are of a technical nature. They require people with human resources and business experience in schools, which makes them much more difficult to fill, especially, part of what you deal with is the complexity of the City Personnel Commission and the fluidity of staff being able to go back and forth. That's something I don't think you can control, but it will be very important to retain people in the technical positions. And just an example right now is your DOT is very thin. DLTs tend to be thin because of the expertise required, but in terms of depth and of the people who can work with the fiscal system, with the payroll system, and you've got several, we can throw off all the initials, but with PeopleSoft and the Empower system, you've got two different systems. So it's very complicated, but it needs to be staffed with expertise.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alexander, then Commissioner Sanchez.
Thank you. And I appreciate the points my colleagues have raised. I want to come back to our Council of Great City Schools guidance for budgets, which begins with the sentence, "The school board should review the proposed budget from the superintendent with the initial assumption that it does not accomplish the community's vision while honoring the community's values, and that the superintendent has to convince us to vote yes on the budget." So Superintendent Wayne, my vote is no right now on the budget, and I'm waiting to be convinced for next year. And I guess I just want to, I don't understand that process for going into next year. And I mean, this also says, for the because of the potential for back and forth as part of the deliberative process, it's wise to begin the budget adoption process at least 4 to 6 months prior to any statutory deadlines for adoption. So to me, a meeting in June, early June, does not seem like the time to begin. And I guess I'm confused by that. And I'm not sure I understand how that's going to play out in line with our process that we're following.
Sure. So tonight, so first, just to clarify, tonight, you're not approving a budget. You're approving the second interim report for the 22-23 school year budget, which was developed before we adopted goals. And then for the process you described, and we did have our budget workshop where I think we did talk about priorities and some of what the board expected to see. And so then and then the work around our goals and guardrails is helping inform the budget development process. And so that's what then the initial presentation will be a follow-up from that to convince you of how the budget has shifted to be more aligned with the resources. And, then that gives an opportunity for some feedback before adoption. I will say, hearing the line of questioning, I'm going to think about ways maybe before then to provide some update on how it's developing so that you can, so that there's maybe some mid-development correction that could be, or feedback that can be offered.
Yeah, I just didn't want to get us to get to June. Basically, I was maybe over dramatizing that a little bit for effect, but I didn't want to get to June and have us be in a situation where the board's saying, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Or how does this really align with our goals? And you not have a chance then to come back and us be up against the wall, because we've been there before, not with you as superintendent, but so that was the spirit of that inquiry. Thank you.
Commissioner Sanchez.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for your hard work, your team's hard work, and we're all very happy about the positive certification for the second interim report. I just have one question, which is around the May revise. So we didn't really talk about the May revise much, but just how could the May revise play out, and what positive or negative effects might we expect?
So the May revise will, I think, based on what we saw in the January budget proposal, I think the main areas where we received updates were the cost of living adjustment for, the kind of growth factor in the local control funding formula. It could affect next year, and also for the out years for our planning for how the LCFF projection looks over several years. So that is one where the current COLA that has been used for planning is quite high. And so there is a possibility that it could go down. We hope not, but that is one where that sort of informs, that growth factor overall for LCFF.
Is there any indication of what's going to happen in May? Do we have any idea regarding COLA?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that there's sort of different, once the January proposal comes out, there tend to be a couple of different firms or different organizations then sort of review the assumptions and will weigh in. And I think that for now, there sort of are indications or questions of if we're as a state moving towards a potential economic downturn, then what would that mean? The way that the COLA is calculated won't there's a little bit of a lagging effect. So we wouldn't immediately see the COLA go down if the projection in, the next year or two out is an economic downturn. So not sure. The last thing that I would add is that we got updates on, for example, one of the block grants that we received last summer as part of the enacted budget was reduced. So I think that that's one where it's in the world of the one-time multi-year funding sources, but where we're trying to develop plans, that I think that might be another place where we either learn of, it could be increases in funding or we get confirmation that some of those ongoing, more restricted funding sources will continue.
One last thing, it's just slide 9 that I think Vice President Wiseman Ward was referring to as well. I do appreciate the ongoing funds addition. I just would recommend that we put in parenthetically when these sunset, the ones that are local have sunset dates, and I just think it'd be helpful for the public to know what those dates are.
You mean for
PEEF.
For PEEF and the partial taxes? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can add that. And I think the dates for the one time are also, that's as Mr. Ducharme said, some of them will expire in September 2023 or 24. So that's part of the getting it all out.
Yes, add this. Thanks.
Thank you, commissioners. I saw Pam virtually unmute and come on camera. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Pam, before we move on.
Thank you. I wasn't sure how to approach this. The one thing I will say is that with the May revise, one of the concerns that they have at the state level right now is that because they've given extensions to a lot of counties in Riverside on filing their income taxes this year, and some of it is going past, I believe, I want to say it may even be August or September, that it's going to be more difficult for the state to really kind of see where they are financially because of that. And so I would think that at the May revise, it may be a little bit more conservative just based on that, not having the information that they need to be able to see where they are standing with the collection of personal taxes. But that was just the only thing I wanted to mention.
Thank you so much for adding that context.
I was gonna just, as a segue, say that we both, I think Pam and myself would recommend being quite conservative, even with the May revise, because the COLA, which is really the implicit price deflator, which is, it's a calculation, doesn't govern what the governor does. So the governor takes that money, and it also doesn't govern how much revenue the state gets. So the state gets a certain amount of revenue. There's a statutory COLA, and then the governor has to put that all together in a budget. And until you see that, it's going to be difficult to predict what might happen. And in the past several years, the legislature has moved more and more toward restricting certain parts of that money. So even under Prop 98, you're seeing more and more of it restricted. That's why you have a lot of these ongoing, the one-time funds, the ELOP, not the arts and entertainment, arts and music, arts and music construction materials, which is actually less restricted. That was passed, the Prop 28. That's where you have two sources of art and music, but one of them is more restricted, one is less restricted. But I think you're going to see more and more of that. So the district should be prepared for the legislature to really give you some direction in how they want you to spend money. So I think all those things need to be thought out as you look at your next year budget. I did want to respond a little bit to Commissioner Alexander, because I think that's a really good point, that over time, the board should be intimately involved with the development of the budget. You have a new LCAP coordinator, director, I'm not sure, manager in the district. And I think you will see over time, and I'm underscoring over time, the alignment between your values, your goals, guardrails, values, and VVGG, vision, values, goals, and guardrails. I have to pick up the San Francisco language every time I come to town, but I think it's critical you look at those. And in the next couple of years, you're going to have to look at those within the context of how much money you have. I always have to end with how much money you have.
And I want to be clear, I don't expect it all to be solved this year either. So my semi-joking point there, I hope I didn't make the superintendent too uncomfortable. I really was just saying, I want us to make sure that we're being transparent. And if we know that, I think all of us know we're not going to be able to turn the entire ship overnight, but I think it is really important to be transparent with the public about what we are turning and what we're not turning. And so if there are things that aren't aligned yet, to be able to be honest about that, and for the board to be able to ask questions and say, okay, we're agreeing and we're going to approve this budget, even though maybe we all agree that it's not where we want it to be. I just want to make sure there's time for that conversation and that doesn't get jammed up in 2 weeks and everyone's like, oh my gosh, because when we do it all at the last minute, also we have teachers and parents and other stakeholders all kind of stressed all at the same time. And I think the more we can kind of have a little breathing room, the more we can have those conversations in a deliberative way. So that was just to clarify, that was the intention of my comment.
I hear that, but I think, I appreciate the clarification, but I do think as we're developing the budget, like there are updates we can give along the way as we see priorities come out. Like, for example, we're going to be talking at the next meeting about our progress monitoring for student outcomes about literacy, and there are definitely some costs there. So I do think providing some updates along the way will be helpful.
All right, and with that, roll call vote, Mr. Steele.
Thank you, President Bogus. Commissioner Alexander.
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb,
Yes.
Commissioner Matomedy,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez,
Yes.
Commissioner Wiseman Ward, President Bogus.
Yes.
Thank you. 6 ayes.
Right, thank you. And with that, we will go to item E2. Can I have a motion and a second on the Fourth Amendment to the contract between San Francisco Unified School District and Infosys Limited?
Summary.
Second.
Thank you, President Bogus. Good evening again. With me is again as interim associate superintendent of business, Dr. Candy Clark, and our head of staff, Marin Trujillo, who's also been the lead at our command center where we're implementing our corrective action plan. And so do we have the presentation coming up? I think it's still loading. So while it's loading, I'll say tonight, we're going to share why we need to amend the Infosys contract. What are some key differences between this amendment and the previous contracts that we've made to increase accountability and timely delivery of services? And then the next steps to increase our ability to effectively manage Empower SF overall and Infosys in particular. Okay.
Good evening, commissioners. This is my first time addressing you guys, so hello, everyone. So I want to talk to you a little bit about why we continue to need Infosys and why this contract was needed. They remain a critical element to sustain and support payroll, human resources, and many of our day-to-day operations. The capacity of SFUSD to have its internal team up and running is still in motion. So we remain dependent on Infosys for that. And lots of the institutional knowledge still remains with Infosys. To that end, there are some key differences from the previous amendments that you see today. One of them is that this contract is time and material as opposed to a fixed rate. We have precisely identified what needs to be fixed. I will say that in that process, we will find other issues, but we have a very clear understanding of what needs to be fixed right now. We have clear change control mechanisms and ways to escalate issues from both ends. And as you can see in the contract itself, there's now a requirement for senior management to senior management communications on a weekly basis. Now, when I say we have some clarity on the work, what you have in front of you are what are known as the work packages that our partners A&M have helped us identify. We have identified close to 66 known issues, 20 new defects. They've been organized into work packages. The ones in bold are the ones that we believe are the first ones we're going to work on: interface, employee payroll, and time entry and management. And these are important. The sequence is important for us to know how we're going to start interfacing with this work and making sure that Infosys and SFUSD teams are on the same page and accomplishing the remediation.
And this is critical for the board to understand, and I think also helpful for the public to see, because so much of this implementation, when we are talking about the challenges with the implementation, a question that keeps coming up is, where is the accountability? And in previous amendments to Infosys, it hasn't been delineated exactly what they'll focus on. It was just as general: we need the system, first launched, and then we need the system fixed. And so this is where you can see exactly what work should be completed, and we can provide that progress report on how they're doing. But that is not the only, that's not the only step that will help make sure we have stabilized Empower. And they have, clear technical support they need to provide. One of the things that they've been providing, which has been hard, has been some of the ongoing support just to run our payroll. So we need to make sure we're hiring the required staff to ensure we can run the system on its own. And then we need to train staff to support the implementation. And we also need to try to say no to things as we get stabilized. So there's features that we'd like to have, that maybe can help us in the future better understand, our personnel and manage evaluations. But right now we can't add new enhancements. We need to pause on anything new and get this stabilized. So to share a little bit more about what it looks like to hire our own staff and train staff and really take ownership of implementing this successfully, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Clark.
So we've taken a three-step approach, as Dr. Wayne mentioned. One of the most critical components of looking at staff is training. Right now, we're in the process of digging deep and developing additional professional development for payroll staff, human resources staff, IT staff, accounting, as well as site staff. And a lot of that training is centered on understanding how to utilize the system and how one individual's job may impact the work that's happening downstream within the system. So we're bringing different departments together so that they can see the big picture. And that's been, we've had a lot of positive feedback from those trainings that we've had so far. And it's also guiding us in terms of trainings that we'll begin to develop going forward. The other part of the approach is looking at increasing access to external support. Right now, there's one vendor that we're utilizing for temporary staff. The challenge is trying to find individuals that may have school district experience as well as success factor experience that we could potentially pull in. That pool of talent is thin. And so rather than try to completely rely on a small group of individuals, we're expanding our RFP to look at bringing in additional resources, even if it's temporary staff, to focus on some of those areas. And so that RFP has been released, and we are hoping within the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to get feedback from the RFP and be able to utilize that to add additional entities to the core group of staffers that may be able to come in. Now, that's more of a short-term goal, which is the last piece that I want to talk about, was the long-term goal, which is being able to hire staff full-time within the organization. We have been working very hard to look at 42 or 43 essential positions that we need to have in place in order to continue to move forward with this system. And so that has been a challenge for a variety of different ways. A lot of it is stemming around trying to find individuals that are willing to come and work for the district, and, to fill in some of these roles. And so we're rethinking how we approach recruitment. I've recommended, a more active approach. So rather than wait for individuals to apply, let's go out and knock on doors and make phone calls in neighboring, entities or districts to see who might be interested in coming to work for San Francisco Unified. I've shared with Dr. Wayne, in a couple of weeks, I'll be at the CASBO conference, which is the state conference where all the business professionals are. And I do plan to actively recruit for all of the positions that we have available, and hopefully we'll drum up a little bit more interest in the district so that we could potentially hire folks from either in the Bay Area or outside of the area, but just around the state that have the skill sets that we need in order to continue to move forward.
And as I go to the next slide, I just want to share how this has really become an all hands on deck. And so when we talk about the training of new staff who comes in, just last week I was at the command center, and our own Judson Steele and Alicia Barias, who, our full-time job is to support the board office, have been supporting also the command center, and they were training new people coming in. And, again, that's what it's taken to make the progress, which we know is not enough, but to make the progress we've made so far, is having people get out of their day jobs to just step up and help us address these issues. So just to give, I think this gives a picture of the hiring that we need to do.
Sure. This is a list of the immediate and urgent needs that we have identified for positions. The dark green represents positions that are filled. The light green represents positions that are ready to interview. And then if you go to the blue colors, they're either being prepared to post or posted. I would have loved to have been able to show you a screen that had all green, dark green, because that would have moved us in moved us down the road a lot further. But I do want to point out that this list is very critical to our ability to continue to move this system forward. There are positions identified in business services, particularly in payroll, human resources, and information technology. The expectation is that for many of these positions that you see here, they will either be assigned 100% to the Empower implementation team and work there, or they will be backfill on the operational side within the department so that another staffer can come and focus full-time on Empower. This is a daunting task. There are a lot of positions that we need to fill. And I believe at my last count, out of the 43 positions, we may have filled 10 or 11. So that there's a lot of work that needs to continue to happen in order to fill these positions.
Can you adjust the it's a little off? Okay, go ahead about the funding though. What happened to the? There we go.
Okay, so on the funding source for this amendment is coming from, oh, could you go back?
I won't touch anything. Can you go back to the previous slide?
It's not moving.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Okay, you can just speak to the funding
Okay.
sources. And
So funding sources are for this particular amendment are related to one-time funding sources that we have identified in relationship to salary savings. You saw that list of positions, many are already in the budget, but they've yet to be filled. So that savings will be utilized to fund a portion of the position. We talked earlier in first interim as it related to OPEB and that $20 million savings. So a small portion of that will also be utilized to cover the cost of this amendment.
So sorry for the presentation challenges there, but yeah, so the key point is we know it's hard to bring forward another amendment to be putting more money into this implementation. Again, it's a different type of amendment, and the point is one-time funds will be used for that. And then just as far as next steps, if you go to the next slide. So we're going to continue working on a corrective action plan to reach our key milestones. I will provide, as I have been doing at each board meeting, an update on our progress towards those. We will be getting weekly activity reports from Infosys to hold them accountable for progress and continue to communicate our efforts to stabilize the system. I do want to say with this, since I've started in San Francisco, I came in knowing that this was a challenge, not knowing the huge scope and the depth of these issues that we're facing. What I've appreciated is how in San Francisco, the community wants to help and people have stepped up and offered support. So we met last week with the city of San Francisco and the controller's office has provided support. DCYF has provided support, and then just community members are interested in helping. And so for negotiating this contract, as we've emphasized, that it's different than previous amendments. It's different in part because we had the support of Ditka Rainier. She's a community member who has spent her whole career, 40 years, negotiating technology implementation contracts. And she offered to support us for free. We actually paid her $1 so we could cover any liability concerns, and has worked countless hours to help bring this contract to the standard it needs to be for us to accomplish our goals and to really hold the Infosys accountable for the work. So I just wanted to recognize her and the other, our other partners who've really stepped up and said, we want the district to be successful. How can we help? Let us know. And it's been our pleasure and privilege to work with them and work with people like Ditka to try to move forward this implementation.
Right, and with that, why don't we see if there's any public comment on this item?
I think you have a couple cards. Steve Zeltzer, I think you may have spoken earlier. Susan Kelly DeGrotto. Looks like she may have left as well. If she returns, we'll go ahead and give her time.
Please raise your hand if you care to speak to this amendment. Each speaker will have 1 minute. Can we please have that repeated in Spanish and Chinese?
Si alguien desea hacer un comentario acerca del punto del cual se acaba de tocar, por favor levante su mano y cada persona tendrá 1 minuto para hablar. Gracias. Cantonese.
如果你想就住呢個修訂案作公眾發言的話咧，你而家可以舉手啦，每人有1分鐘嘅時間，唔該。
Thank you. I'll call on Charles and then Chris. Charles, go ahead, please.
Thank you. 3 words, sunk cost fallacy. Please look it up. So what is the normal or average cost to an organization for payroll software? You are looking for $500 per employee more for a total of close to $3,000 total per employee. The cost should be 1/10 of that. But obviously nobody could do that research. But somebody got rich and was paid off in SFUSD and got away with it. You don't have to be an Inspector Colombo to figure out how to find people who benefited either. Someone knew someone at Infosys and gave them the contract. But, you know, it should be given and handed over to the local FBI office. I'm not laughing, and the kids of the city suffer because of the corruption. It's always pay to play in San Francisco. Either investigate it or admit you support, as a school official or board member, people who steal from the public schools. Please do not let them get away with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris and then Miss Marshall. Chris, go ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Chris, we can't hear you. You sound a little bit far away.
Let me see. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, I'll just project. I'm Chris Klaus, and I have 2 points tonight, one of which is a question. I'm a special education teacher at Washington High School, by the way. First point, salary savings from open positions are not savings. That money represents open positions that SFUSD has failed to fill, causing at this point almost immeasurable harm to educators, secretaries, nurses, security guards, custodians, payroll staff, and really all employees of SFUSD. I'm tired of SFUSD claiming savings from open positions across the district, whether those positions are in classrooms at school sites, in payroll, or in other positions across SFUSD. They aren't savings, they're failures. The second point is my question. Given all of the harm that has been caused by this system and the ballooning expenses of it, is this worth it? That's the question that you need to answer. If this doesn't solve the problems, SFUSD will have spent over $30 million by my count on this system. So again, I'm asking, is this worth it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Ms. Marshall?
Thank you. Good evening. Board of Commissioners, Superintendent Mack. I am appalled to hear a request for more money. I am appalled that you cannot find people in San Francisco, I know you can, who can do the position you had on that screen. This company should not be given 1 penny that takes away from the integrity from the students and staff in this district. I know that you can find people who can do what's on that screen. Before this system arrived, SFUSD hired people in HR, in payroll, who did this work as part of their regular job. You have spent so much money on this system. This organization, and I agree with the caller before me, this needs to be an FBI investigation or an NAACP investigation. This company should not receive not 1 penny more. There are people in this town who can do that work as part of their regular SFUSD job. They did it in the past. Why can't they do it now? Give this money to the teachers. Give this money to the custodians. Give this money to people you have not paid, but not to this company. This company is a fraud.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. That does conclude virtual public comment for this item.
Appreciate that. And we will go to staff comments. I have a few initial comments and we'll go to other commissioners. I guess if staff could talk a little bit about the expertise gap and just kind of where we are maybe lacking internal expertise and kind of the impact that kind of outside consultants are kind of playing to fill that gap. And essentially just trying to get a feel of what would be the reality of if we kind of had to run these systems kind of by ourselves without outside help at this point, just kind of like what state would we be in?
So I'm going to talk about two different things. One thing is, I think there needs to be recognition that even before the implementation of Empower SF, there were the vacancies within particularly the business services department. I can't speak for other departments, but that should be recognized. So coming into this system, the goal of, filling a lot of those positions had yet to emerge. And so now here we are still trying to continue to move forward with the system, and those gaps in subject matter experts are still there. When we look at school districts, that's a unique skill set. There are individuals that you can hire from other agencies if they've got government experience and payroll. Yes, those are transferable skills. But if you're coming from the outside, let's say private sector, some aspects you'll be able to manage, but that individual may not have experience dealing with the teacher's retirement system or with the classified retirement system. They may not necessarily have experience with contract labor agreements and the variety of salary calculations that are necessary to deliver an appropriate pay for an individual. What we're dealing with the Empower system is that there are 3 separate modules. And so for an employee record, rather than having that record in one location, pieces of it are all in these 3 systems. And so an individual who may be over here on the benefit side doing work may enter something in, and if it's not in the appropriate frequency or scope or cadence for what the system needs, when it makes its way downstream, it may cause an issue. And so we need individuals who, number one, understand what school business payroll looks like or school business retirement looks like, so that as they're entering that information, as those issues are coming up, the goal is that individual would catch it first before it gets into the system. And so that's the perfect situation. But when you have vacancies and you're bringing individuals in that may not necessarily have that expertise, you have to train them from the ground up. And so that's a journey in itself to get the person up to where they need to be, while we're also trying to put remediation efforts in place to continue to move the system forward. I'd like to talk a little bit about the life cycle of an employee from the time the individual applies for a position, is hired on board, and then move through the pay cycle. The scope and the manner in which this system is set up, it's not like the information rolls through smoothly, right? It's, you start here, this particular element of the system needs to replicate, and needs to replicate in 2 other places. And if there are any gaps in that replication, we have a problem. We know that there are 50 fields within this system that directly impact pay. But those 50 fields are not just within the payroll department. They're not just within the HR department. There's throughout these different elements of the system. And so it's critical to make sure that wherever those 50 fields land, we need subject area experts that are trained up and understand how this system operates in order to ensure that those fields are always kept in sequence, that there's no interface gaps within the process, so that the system can replicate and move pay to the payroll department. I've said this once before, we call it a payroll issue, but it's really not a payroll issue. There are many things that are happening within those 50 fields that are outside of the payroll department. It's in the back end and it's replicating, and it's just automatically moving through to pay an employee. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing. The other piece of it is on the IT side of the house, with the requirements to manage this system. It's different from the previous system. And so this system requires a higher level of expertise than what may have been needed before. One of the challenges that we've been having is finding individuals that have SAP SuccessFactors experience, particularly individuals who have worked with a government agency, a school district, in the payroll and the HR side of the house, because those are the two areas that seem to be having the most impact from those 50 fields throughout the systems. And so it's not just, pulling someone in off the street and throwing them in a position. It's really being thoughtful and methodical about the skill sets that are needed, the training that's required, and whether or not that individual has the ability to, learn it while we're also implementing a system. It's a huge lift. And those positions that you see listed, that's just immediate need. That's not all the vacancies in the organization, but those are the things that we've identified in terms of key areas that we want to focus on to be able to have people in positions focus full time on this particular implementation.
Thank you for that. The next question I had was about kind of the uniqueness of our systems in San Francisco and how things are set up. And I guess if you could, give your opinion of seeing other districts, how things compare here, and I guess the ability to compare what's happening in other districts and like their ability to kind of manage things or the systems they use kind of versus the approach that we've taken, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to give one example. What's definitely unique about San Francisco is being part of the civil service and the city managing our benefits. So, earlier in the year, we had an issue with people's benefits being dropped. And that issue was compounded because it was in part due to the communication that was happening between our system and the Health and Human Services system in the city. And that's just not, districts typically manage their own health benefits, so wouldn't need to send that information over to a whole nother entity for health benefits to be activated. So that's just, one concrete example of the complexity we're dealing with that maybe other districts that surely other districts aren't dealing with. I don't know if you want to give another specific example.
Yeah, one of the things that I see is drastically different is the employee record. And usually the employee record is in one location in a system. So you're able to go in, input information into that one location, and then the information moves out. The way this system is set up, it's pieces of the employee record are in these different modules. And so that information is put in multiple different places, and it has to replicate accurately and move its way through. So you have a very different workflow for how information comes in and how it moves over to payroll for processing. I'm only aware of one school district in the state that has this system in place. And I know that it was a very difficult implementation. And I believe it took somewhere around 7 + 10 years, somewhere in there, for that system to be implemented. And we definitely don't want to repeat what happened in that district. But there were a lot of common themes between the issues that they discovered versus what we're seeing within this system.
Thank Thank you. And my last question is, I take all the time for questions. If maybe you or the superintendent could just kind of address why the public should trust us and kind of have faith in like this decision and kind of like the path we're going kind of versus some of the decisions we've made to kind of lead us to this place where we're kind of in crisis still.
Yeah, I don't know that I can expect the public's trust just yet. And I'll just keep pointing to highlighting the differences that what we're trying to do, such as having the clear scope for this contract, or having the regular updates that we've been providing, and and then again, it's not where it needs to be, but still trying to demonstrate where we've made progress in resolving issues. So I feel like that trust is something that we're a ways from earning, but that's what I would point to and to demonstrate we're intentionally trying to earn that trust back.
Thank you for that response. Additional questions or comments from commissioners? Scene one from Commissioner Alexander.
I was just gonna comment that this is a hard vote. I think for me, I think it's for all of us. And I actually voted no on the Infosys First Amendment, I believe it was in June of 2021, because at that time I felt like I was being asked to approve, I think I said this to someone in a private conversation, to approve a blank check. I don't feel that way about this one. And I think that's due to the diligent work of Mr. Trio, Dr. Clark, Superintendent Wayne. I feel I, as a board member, have been able to have extensive briefings and feel that there's a level of accountability here that didn't exist before. I don't expect the public to believe that yet, but I want to say, like, as a representative of the public here, I would not be voting for this unless I felt like that level of accountability was there. And so I just want to say that I share the extreme skepticism that has been expressed by many members of the public, and I think my colleagues do as well. I don't want to speak for people, but I mean, this is a really, really tough one, but I think we also understand that, we actually need the system if we want to keep paying our employees right now. And if we want to start looking at other alternatives, it's going to take time. We got to get this system working first. It's the only one we have. And then we can start moving forward. And I just want to appreciate what I think is a different way of working from the team here.
Okay, seeing no more comments from commission. Sorry, I missed Vice President Wiseman.
You didn't. I was late. I want to just briefly in 30 seconds thank Commissioner Alexander for his thanks to the work that's being done. I absolutely share your sentiments, and I think that while votes aren't always easy or feel good, I do feel a level of confidence that I didn't necessarily feel before, because of the thoughtfulness that's being put into this, the transparency with us at the board, the regular briefings that we're getting from Dr. Wayne in our meetings here. And the reality is we have to pay our educators and our staff. And until this is stabilized, there's not other options. And I think not approving this puts us in a position where a lot of folks are going to endure significant harm. And we're not in a position, nor would I ever want to cause additional harm. So.
Commissioner Lamb.
Thank you to the team for the tremendous work. I just also want to name how frustrating, how infuriating, how angry, it's been for the board as the governance, we all do, the responsibility of stewarding public funds. And knowing that, our core of our staff and educators deserve their dignity and to be respected. And I say that every month this report comes up. And I just also want to name, thank you, Dr. Clark, for your Herculean work. In just a couple of months you have joined us. It is so clear how much we need the expertise and the prioritization around turnaround for this district And everything goes back to its core around fiscal business operations. Without that core, everything else cannot function. Clearly, we've been living it for over a year now. So I just wanted to just also express, that we know it's still going to be a long road ahead, but I want to just acknowledge the superintendent, his leadership with the team around these key differences, and thanks to our city partners and community members who are lending their expertise with us and so that we can correct course. But I just want to, and I appreciate Dr. Clark just raising, it's not just about payroll. This is so much of much deeper system work that needs to happen. And that is why, after many decades, I think we're finally going to need to put the attention, the resources, the skills, the expertise, so that we can have a stronger foundation. So thank you.
Roll call vote, Mr. Steele?
Thank you. Commissioner Alexander,
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher,
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb,
Yes.
Commissioner Matomedy,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez,
Yes.
Vice President Wiseman Ward,
Yes.
President Bogus,
Yes.
7 ayes, passes.
All right, thank you. And with that, we'll move to item F, informational items, and we have 2.
And these are just presented for yours and the public's information. These are the sunshines from the United Association, United Administrators of San Francisco, sorry. The United Administrators of San Francisco to us, and then our proposal, our sunshine of the proposals will negotiate to them. As part of the process, we first share them as an information item. We will have a public hearing on them next week, and then we seek the board's approval or acceptance of our sunshine, and the public can comment on both ours and UA's at the next meeting.
All right, and with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:18.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes.
Happy Pi Day, everybody.
Yeah.